Good evening. My name is Dottie Head. I'm the Director of Communications for Birds, Georgia, and we're delighted to welcome Patty Kappmeyer with Hilton Head Audubon to our webinar this evening. Before I introduce her, I wanted to tell you about an event we have coming up. We're launching the Fall Flyway Festival this September with a long list of in-person and virtual events highlighting the connection between birds and native plants. The highlight of this month-long celebration is going to be our Fall Flyway Festival round robin on Saturday, September 14th at the Birds Georgia office. We're thrilled to welcome keynote speaker Jennifer Seska, who is the conservation coordinator in the Science and Conservation Program at the State Botanical Gardens of Georgia in Athens. She's going to present a presentation entitled Connect to Protect, a Call to Action from a Conservation Botanist in Solidarity and in Hope. And then we're going to have lots of hands-on sessions with both native plants and bird-related topics. When we finish up here, I'll drop a link to the Fall Flyway Festival website in the chat button so y'all can check it out. A couple of housekeeping items. This meeting is being closed captioned. If you'd like to enable closed captioning, you can click the CC button at the bottom of your screen and choose Show Captions. It's predictive text, so it's going to mangle some words, but it's better than nothing. We are recording this event, and we will send a link out to everybody who registered sometime next week. So keep your eyes on your email for that. And finally, if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A. Click the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and I'll relay them to Patty after she finishes up her presentation. If you put them in the chat, they tend to scroll up and get lost. So it's better to put questions in the Q&A. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Patty Kappmeyer. Patty's love affair with Hilton Head Island and its diversity of bird species began more than 30 years ago when her family moved there. She says she's happiest when she's knee-deep in pluff mud, wandering the marshes or forests seeking out birds. Each bird has a soul and personality that she tries to capture through her photography. Through her images, she seeks to educate, inspire, and uplift people to conserve and preserve the fragile ecosystems of Hilton Head Island and the Low Country. Patty is a secretary of Hilton Head Audubon and a member of the Carolina Bird Club and the Carolina Nature Photographers Association. She recently published a beautiful interactive ebook titled Flight Through the Seasons, excuse me, Discovering Birding and Photography in the Low Country. You should definitely check it out. So I'm going to turn it over to Patty because I'm choking. So, Patty, let me share the screen here,
Sure.
And we'll get started.
Hi, everyone. Here we go. So we had a little bit technical difficulty. So Dottie's actually going to be manning the slide. So if you hear me say next, it's to Dottie. So welcome and thank you for coming, and thank you, Dottie. This is a presentation that I'm doing on behalf of Hilton Head Audubon. We've gone around to different nature organization, photography clubs in and around Hilton Head, Beaufort County, and also remotely. Really telling the story of a birding and a very specific history of a place, but in the broader context of the Low Country and the history, because there are some very special places that we love to go birding and connect with nature that have, the human story behind it. So this is that story. Next. And I want to say thank you to my friend Dottie and Birds Georgia for inviting Hilton Head Audubon to present to your membership and friends. Next. Dottie talked about me. I've been roaming Hilton Head in the area for over 30 years now, more like 40. I've seen it change, but I still love it. And what I really want to do is educate and inspire and advocate to preserve all of the delicate ecosystems around here. And I've done that, started my own business, which is more about education and conservation, and just helping people connect to the beauty of birding and nature in the Low Country. Next. And Dottie's gone through this, just some of the things that I've done. my membership, written articles for Camera in the Wild, contributed to REI's Guide to Bird Watching for Beginners. I've worked on this project with National Audubon, Historic Mitchelville, USC Beaufort, and done some things with South Carolina Audubon. I've got some features in local and national magazines. And as Dottie mentioned, I recently wrote a book that's now also available in paperback on Amazon. Next. Just a little bit about Hilton Head Audubon. We are an all-volunteer chapter of National Audubon that was established in 1974. We serve not just Hilton Head, but Beaufort and Jasper counties, and we're about 300 members right now. Next. And one of the things that we are in the process of doing probably the last 2 years is really migrating from a bird club to really a bird and nature conservation organization under the leadership of our president, Kay Grinnell, and our really great board. We're doing a lot of things, outreach in the community, partnering with conservation organizations, offering education in classes, and just focusing more on the conservation part of birding. Next. And some of the things we do, we participate and monitor community science projects like the Christmas bird count. We offer a lot of field trips, bird walks, educational programs. I know we've partnered with Birds Georgia to offer the master birding class the last couple of years. And we also partner with local and regional civic and conservation organizations like the Coastal Conservation League and write letters. We have a advocacy group that meets with the town of Hilton Head on a regular basis to keep abreast of what's going on and what their thinking is. Next. And this is just some of the press that we've received recently about conservation. We joined the fight to preserve Bay Point. Just about educating people about birds, the bird count, enjoying nature, the importance of this, particularly the place we're going to talk about today, Mitchelville, in terms of a stopover for migrating birds. So this is just a small part of the press that we've received in the last few years, and we're proud of it. We are also own the Audubon Newhall Preserve. It's 50 acres that's located here in kind of the south end of the island. It's our mission to preserve kind of this native forest ecosystems where over 140 bird species have been recorded. I hope that some of you have visited. I think Lynn Hodgson is on here. She offers field trips, bird walks every Tuesday morning when she's in, usually in the fall to early spring. We've got new interpretive signs. We have a new kiosk. It's just a really interesting place to see the different ecosystems that were native to the island, including the Pocosin, there's Audubon Pond, there's wildlife, there's birds. So if you're visiting Hilton Head, please stop by our Audubon Newhall Preserve. And you can always visit our website to keep up with the bird walks and the things that we're doing there. Next. As part of this presentation and this project, we have become very close partners with the Gullah Geechee community on Hilton Head. For the last 2 years, we have been invited to participate in their Juneteenth celebration. Last year, we participated as the broader group, and we did such a great job that they invited us back this year and gave us our own day. So thanks to a really dedicated group of volunteers, we had a very successful Hilton Head Audubon Juneteenth celebration. We had all sorts of local conservation organizations came up and set up tents. We had Gullah food and arts and crafts, and we've been invited back next year as well too. So this is one of the great things that happened with this grant that we received and this project that I'm going to talk about. Next. So how did this happen? So we applied for an Audubon in Action, a grant in January 2023, and we were awarded it. And it was really about outreach in the community, and expanding, and diversifying and educating. And this is something that was just really dear to my heart because there are so many places, not only on Hilton Head, but in the Ace Basin, that are just special places to go birding. And you can't go birding there and not look at the rice trunks and the canals and not be, touched by the history of the place. So this was kind of an homage to that, but also to educate people about this lovely place that everybody loves to go birding on Hilton Head, and understand the people who live there, how they got there, and what they've done for the community and Hilton Head recently in terms of conservation. Next. So we partnered with the University of South Carolina-Beaufort. They have a Students Connected program that provides students with real world experience to benefit low country community. And we were so lucky that we partnered with Professor Sarah Swafford's professional writing class for nonprofits. So it was the students who assisted in this research and also prepared some marketing materials and interactive kind of like bird bingo things for our original Juneteenth celebration. And this is the result of our grant. We created a booklet called The Gullah Geechee of Mitchelville: The Cultural Ties to Bird and Nature. We unveiled it in 2023. I think we're going to be there's always more that I find out, so I hope that we'll have another version in the next year. And Juneteenth, I'm sure as most of you know, is a holiday to commemorate the emancipation of enslaved people in the United States. It's the day that the emancipation reached, I think there were 250,000 slaves in the Galveston, Texas area. So they were the last to hear about emancipation. So that's why the holiday is celebrated on June 19th. Next. Binya. So we're going to talk about, this is the Gullah word for bin here. It also means native of the island or the ancestral ties to the island. So a little bit about who the Gullah Geechee are. And when I was researching this, I thought it was really important to tell the story as much as possible through first-person accounts, using personal journals, correspondences, oral history, archaeological records, art forms, geography, old newspaper articles, and other historical documents. So the context of the content is kind of reading through all these, primary sources. Next. And the first part of this is by Queen Quet, where she says, "Without the land, we don't have the culture. Land is family to the Gullah Geechee, and the waterways are our bloodlines." Next. And so who is Queen Quet? Well, she's Marquetta L. Goodwin. She is actually a mathematician and a computer scientist. She's a writer. She's an environmental justice advocate. And in 1996, she founded the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition to really help preserve their way of life and their rights. She was then selected to be the first Queen Mother and the official spokesperson for the Gullah Geechee Nation. So she's respectfully referred to as Queen Quet, Chiefess of the Gullah Geechee Nation and head of state. Next. So what is the Gullah Geechee Nation? It's a native culture. It's native to the Sea Islands of South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina. It's really a combination of African, Native American traditions and ethnic groups. It was recognized by the United Nations as a kind of a non-sovereign indigenous people in 2006, and they are fully engaged in active cultural preservation and continuation. And that's their flag over here on the left. Next. So as I mentioned, they declared themselves as a nation in 2000. And roughly it runs from Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida, and about 30 miles inland. The islanders self-identify themselves as saltwater Geechee, but their preferred reference is to be known as Gullah Geechee. And interestingly, one of the most distinctive specimens of Gullah dialect is documented on Hilton Head Island. So just kind of the context of what the Gullah Geechee Nation is. Next. And where do Gullah and Geechee come from? Typically, Gullah is kind of the accepted name of islanders in South Carolina, while Geechee refers to islanders on the Georgia Sea Islands. And they think that the name comes from, it could come from a couple of places. Gullah is sometimes thought to be a shortened form of Angola, the name of the first group imported to the Carolinas during the early colonial period. Geechee actually had a negative connotation when they were identifying Sea Islanders, but now it's become more acceptable because it's now linked to languages in West Africa. And then there's other research that said Gullah Geechee are borrowed words from, the ethnic groups along the windward or west coast of Africa, such as Gola or some of these other ones that contributed to the creolization of the coastal culture in Georgia and South Carolina. Next. So what is Gullah? What is Geechee? For many years, it was thought to be a Creole, and a Creole is kind of a language where there's two groups of people who don't speak the same language, so they develop kind of a pidgin language to be able to communicate to each other. But a lot more recent research really identifies Gullah Geechee as a separate and distinct language. I mentioned Professor Sarah Swafford from USCB. She is actually a doctor in linguistics, and she could talk to for hours on this. She specializes in this. So just some schools of thought here about Gullah Geechee, but it is her thought that it is a very much not a Creole, but a very separate and distinct language. Next. So now we start to tell the story. How did they get here? It's called the burden of rice. And the West African coast is known as the Rice Coast. Alvise Cadamosto was a Venetian explorer. He was a navigator, and he kept extensive journals. He, in the 15th century, worked for the Portuguese Prince Henry the Navigator to explore the West African coast because they needed labor. And in his journals, he talked about going down the river delta and encountering very black, tall, big men, well-formed, and how green and fertile the whole country was in terms of growing rice. So in many ways, this contributed to the slave trade. And the Africans who lived in these floodplains in the inland Niger Delta began domesticating rice thousands of years ago. Rice planters in South Carolina, the Low Country, lacked knowledge about rice cultivation in tropical conditions. So as a result of the very detailed journals and navigational aids that he passed down, slave traders stalked and seized African rice farmers in the field who had the ability to grow a very specific kind of African rice called Oryza glaberrima, which became known as the famous Carolina gold rice. Next. So just a little bit about slavery by the numbers here in the Low Country. They think 100 to 150,000 slaves went through the slave market in Charleston, and close to 80% of American Blacks are descendants of the slaves, can trace their lineage back to the Gullah Geechee corridor here in South Carolina. And at one point, I think in the 1860 census, almost 60% of the population of South Carolina was classified as slaves. Next. So what did the enslaved laborers do? I found this statistic incredible. They cleared 236,000 acres of black gum, cypress, sweet gum forest to create these rice fields across 160 miles of the South Carolina coast. And this is a quote from the former CEO of the Nemours Wildlife Foundation. He said it took 2 centuries ago to convert our woodland swamps and coastal marshes into agricultural fields, and how these workers learned to use the river tides to water and drain these fields. It's an uncomfortable story to tell because enslaved people provided the labor. So just think of that, 160 miles of the coast that was cleared. Next. And in doing this research, most people know Frederick Law Olmsted as the father of landscape architecture, but he was also an avid abolitionist, and he took many trips into the South, where he talked about. He had a book, I think, called the Cotton Journal, and also this about journey into the seabird slave straits, and it was his mission to call out and document the conditions, the human condition of slavery. And just by reading this, he went back up north, and they said his writings were one of the reasons that Great Britain took a stance against slavery. So as you read through this, it talks about just the how dangerous it was to work in the swamps and and tend to those rice fields. Not only malaria, alligators, snakes, the humidity, the heat. Most children didn't survive infancy. So if you're all interested, a lot of these are online, and you can go read them. But just an interesting thing that popped up in the research. Next. And what struck me too is I read a book called Black Rice, and I also read Olmsted's journals, is how much of this work was women's work. Wherever rice was grown, women were involved because women in Africa had the knowledge. They knew how to cultivate the crops and the seeds and how to process the rice. And in this passage, Olmsted talks about, observing, this group of women and girls engaged in this really, really hard labor, to kill and all the seeds of the weeds or the rice on the ground. Next. So what does this have to do with birding in nature? I call it the silent tribute, because all of these former rice fields, really, they're a silent tribute to the enslaved. And here's a picture of Lynn, if you're on, I think you're pictured in there, a field trip to the Combahee unit of the Ace Basin. And, these abandoned rice fields are now covered with wild grasses and tidal impoundments, and they're just fertile ground for birds and wildlife. And they're breeding grounds, and they're a haven for, resident and migratory birds and waterfowl. So this is what really struck me when I was younger and going out birding and doing photography out here. It's just the human toil of where we love to bird, where we go to seek solace in nature. It just can't be ignored. So this was an important story to tell. Next. And one of the famous birds associated with the rice plantations is the bobolink, or the rice bird. And I'm not going to read all of this, but these are words by Dr. Drew Laham, and he talked about how the birds would come in by the millions on their northward journey to refuel on these plantations, specifically Carolina gold rice. Cultivated by enslaved African Americans, it was their mastery of the tides, their trunk and gate systems, their skin-splitting labor that made money grow in the marsh. They spent their lives knee-deep in mud with disease, biting insects, venomous snakes, and slave drivers. Even children were put to task to frighten the flocks away from the crops with torches and noisemakers. And then the hunters would slaughter the rice birds by the thousands, sending them to the plantation owners' linen-covered tables, the roasted carcasses piled high on Wedgwood china and fat with Carolina gold. So that's kind of the backstory of the Gullah Geechee. And next, now we're going to get into Mitchelville. Next. So this is a quote from one of the Union soldiers who was stationed on Hilton Head. When our troops took Hilton Head Island, the fields were white with cotton ready to be picked. It was a beautiful sight and novel to most of our men. Next. So when the Union Army shelled Bay Point and took Port Royal Sound. The plantation owners fled the Sea Islands and left behind the enslaved, who then became contrabands of war. And here are just some quotes from kind of an older son looking back. My mother said, "Son, that ain't no thunder rolling. That Yankee come to give you freedom." So they became known as freedom seekers. So Hilton Head became the destination for the freedom seekers. They fled the Sea Islands. They came up from Georgia. I can't think of Ebenezer Creek, where all those slaves died trying to cross when the Union Army pulled back that pontoon bridge. Freedom seekers sought refuge on Hilton Head Island, including those brought here as a result of the Combahee and Santee River raids. And another observation by a soldier: Negro slaves came flocking into our camp by the hundreds, escaping their masters when they knew of the landing of Lincoln soldiers, as they called us. Next. So what to do with all these freedom seekers that were coming to Hilton Head? Charlotte Fortin Grimpe was an African-American from, I believe she was from Boston. Her parents were abolitionists, and she was a teacher. And she came down to teach these freedom seekers in something called the Port Royal experiment. And I just love this quote about Hilton Head. It said, "'Twas a strange sight as our boat approached the landing at Hilton Head Island. On the wharf was a motley assemblage, soldiers, officers, and contrabands of every hue and size. Hilton Head looks like a very desolate place, just a long, low, sandy point running out into the sea with no visible dwellings upon it, but soldiers' white roof tents." So very different from how we perceive Hilton Head now. Next. So the Port Royal experiment was an experiment in self-government, and they picked a spot on the old Drayton plantation, which became Mitchelville and became the Negro village, where people, they built their own houses, established their own government, and schools. And it was actually developed as a town, and they had laws and a compulsory education law. This is just a picture of, on the left, of what Mitchelville looked like in 1862. And it was called the Port Royal experiment. Next. And so very, very early on, the freedom seekers, the Gullah Geechee, developed this emotional attachment to the land. And some of the quotes of the people who grew up here, it said, "We were born here. We parents' grave here. This is our home. This is our home. We made these lands what they are." Next. And so now let's talk a little bit about the Gullah Geechee and their connection, their deep, kind of spiritual connection to nature. Next. And so one of the most important relationships with a Gullah worldview is that which exists between human beings and the natural environment. Next. And they truly believe that we are all connected to the cycles of nature. They view their surroundings with respect and a sense of interconnectedness. Their relationship with the environment has always emphasized harmony and social exchange that is non-exploitive. And I love, this is one of my favorite quotes that I found: "The moon be a powerful thing. It control the tides and bring a sense of peace to the night. It's a reminder that we are all connected to the cycles of nature." Next. And so just a little bit about the natural environment of Mitchelville, Fish Hall area. There were 4 habitats that provided materials to sustain life. There's the maritime forest, the salt marsh and creeks, the beach dunes and scrub, and the tidal mud flats, or the pluff mud. And here's another great quote: "The marsh be the heart of our island. It be where the fish and the shrimp be living, and where the birds come to rest their wings. We got to take care of it so it can take care of us." Next. And they really believed in taking only what you need and valuing self-sufficiency in their food supply. So fishing, hunting, foraging, gardening. And through archaeological records, they've been, it was not always so bountiful. Mitchellville was somewhat more reliant on wild foods. This, of course, documented by the historic records that talk of near starvation by Hilton Head Blacks. Next. And going back to kind of their African legacy and heritage, embracing nature for self-care. It's just they regarded plants as healing, and the art of healing and the beliefs surrounding them. In particular, I kept coming across a flower, a weed, whatever you want to call it, wildflower called rabbit tobacco, or the Gullah Geechee called it life everlasting, because it's one of the things that cured everything, from skin rashes to intestinal things. The elders believed that it prolonged life. Next. Also, the connection to nature is bringing the fanner basket, the tradition from West Africa. They used grasses and plant fibers to make these coiled baskets. So unlike Native American baskets, which were woven, the baskets that they brought, the tradition here is the coiled basket. And they used stems from saw palmettos or white oak splints. And this is a picture from the Binya exhibit last year of Janie Cohen. She was one of the last basket makers here on Hilton Head. It's a Sea Island coil basket. Next. And feathers. Feathers were considered a connection to the spiritual world. They used them in traditional rituals and put them in something called spirit bags or gree bags. There were small pouches that were filled with herbs and roots and shells, and different combination things had magical properties. And anahinga feathers in particular were used in traditional medicines as well. Next. And this is something that I found fascinating. This is called Hidden in Plain View, and it had to do with African retentions. So while the praise house was viewed as an outward symbol of assimilation to Christianity, but the ritual deposits buried beneath represented retention to their cultural traditions. So underneath the praise houses, in the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, they would place like buried altars underneath them. And it wasn't just here on Hilton Head and St. Helena where this was found. This was found in praise houses in North Carolina, on the coast of Georgia, and also in Texas. So this is not random. This is a cultural belief and customs that came over from Africa. Next. And so what did they bury in there? So all sorts of organic materials like oyster shells, nut shells, pebbles, eggshells, skulls, ash. But particularly here, shells and rounded pebbles are culturally associated with ancestors and water spirits. And white, blue, black, yellow, and red expressed with shells, pieces of painted ceramic beads, and brick. And the colors are consistent with the color symbolism that's found in West African folklore as well. Particularly white shells and the color blue represent water and water spirits, and they offered protection. So they were considered like house charms, that you would find them in the foundation level of a new house. And it was a common practice among the Yoruba of West Africa, who were among, the large enslaved population here. Next. And now let's get on to birds, or buds. Birds and winged creatures were the epitome of liberté totale for enslaved Africans, a freedom that was achieved through flight. Next. So there's the legend of the flying Africans. It tells the story of the enslaved being able to reclaim their ability to fly and escape their imprisoned life. They say that people could fly, that long ago in Africa, some people knew magic, and they would walk up on the air like climbing up on a gate, and they flew like blackbirds over the fields, black shiny wings flapping against the blue up there. And I think it is in St. Simon Island, I believe, where there was a slave ship where hundreds of slaves jumped overboard in kind of a mass suicide mission. But the folklore that's got passed down in oral tradition said no, they did not drown. They learned to fly, and they flew back to Africa. So "Come Fly Away" actually became part of the coded language used by slaves in organizing runaway attempts. Next. And birds also symbolized very specific energies and characteristics. So an anahinga was grace and adaptability. The screech owl was a harbinger of death. Red-tailed hawks were strength, good luck, success. The hummingbird, good luck, prosperity. The Carolina wren, the news and gossipy. The bald eagle, strength and freedom and protection. And the bobolink, the rice bird, was associated with good luck and abundance. Swallows were, carried messages to the dead, and buzzards were considered protectors. So we see these in kind of the folklore and the stories that are passed on. Next. And some of the birds are a common feature in, kind of these ancestral stories that have been passed on. And one of the more famous ones, common ones, is about the bird sparrow. He's a big braggart, and he likes to tell about all the things that he's done. But he lies a lot, but he does very little work. So he talks about his friends, the redbud, the sparrow, the jaybud, and the thrasher, which we kind of identify today as, the northern cardinal, the blue jay, and the brown thrasher. Next. There's also a Gullah version of the Bible, and there's a passage in there talking about consider the birds of the air, they do not worry. So again, birds are about spirituality, that freedom, that sense of flight to escape imprisonment. Next. And this is interesting. This is a bird count from Beaufort County from 1843. And I just found it interesting that, it's the Carolina parakeet, which is now extinct, is on here. The bobolink was called the rice bird. Not sure what the flamingo was. Might have been a spoonbill. The mocker was the mockingbird. The linnet was a finch. And the redbird was the northern cardinal. But just an interesting census of birds back then. Next. And so what is Mitchelville today? Well, it has and it is a critical stopover on the Atlantic Flyway, with over 230 species of resident overwintering and migrating bird species recorded there. Next. And it's a birding destination, but it's also a place in our local history where, birds and people have coexisted for a long time. Next. Gada. So Gada and Gullah means to protect, to care for. So we talked about and tried to understand the Gullah connection to nature, the do no harm, coexist, take only what you need. And through the last, few decades, that's been exhibited in kind of their quiet but very powerful conservation efforts. So next. And the one that I do remember is in 1969, 1970, BASF wanted to build a chemical plant on Victoria Bluff on the Colleton River. BASF had built a plant on the Savannah River and polluted it, and it threatened the Gullah. There was something called the Hilton Head Fishing Cooperative, the shrimpers, and it really brought kind of the new residents with the start of Charles Fraser and Sea Pines and the Gullah community together. And it was actually the Gullah community who organized the cruise to Washington, where all the shrimp boats went up the coast to Washington, D.C. to protest this. And they won. We don't have BASF polluting our waters. Next. And Queen Quet is also very active in saving the Southeast, specifically in this area in the Low Country, the salt marshes. And, one of the things that she advocates is, building of docks and marinas, et cetera, is detrimental to the ecosystems around here. So she is a big voice in the Southeast Salt Marsh Initiative. Next. And then we all know about Saving Bay Point. It is just across the Port Royal Sound from Hilton Head. It's a little spit of land that has no business being developed, but they wanted to build a hotel and some ecotourism resort there. It's been ongoing for years. We thought we won, but they've come back with something else now. So it's a constant battle to save this way of life for the fishermen and the people who make their living kind of around here. So it's just an ongoing battle. And we support Hilton Head Audubon and all the local conservation organizations. We stand with the Gullah Geechee Nation. Next. And it continues today. There's a fight preserving Pine Island from becoming a golf course, and a developer going in and building homes. Again, it's right next to St. Helena Island, and Gullah Geechee Nation are at the forefront of just protecting the farming, the fishing way of life, and the heritage here too. If you guys haven't been to St. Helena, there's the Penn Center. It's where the Port Royal experiment happened. It was a school. There's a lot of interesting history. Martin Luther King actually wrote the I Have a Dream speech in one of the cottages there. It's a very low key area. You would never know it. And it's rural, but once you go there, it kind of gets in your blood, and you really don't want it to turn into, unfortunately, what Hilton Head is now. So it's something that we appreciate, and we should amplify their voices. And that's it. If you want to download the brochure, or that it's available in an ebook format, just go to Hilton Head Audubon, Oregon. You'll find it on there, and you can download it. And if you want to learn more about Mitchelville, you can go to their website, exploremitchelville.org. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Patty.
You're welcome.
That was fascinating. Does anybody have any questions for Patty? Did you do most of that photography?
I think I did, yeah.
Quite a few. I noticed. I noticed quite a few were attributed to you. That's fantastic.
I think I also went out with the notion of having knowing what content was going to be in there to try to depict the content. And it's a place that I'm there, like, not every day, but probably 4 or 5 times a week. So I know it well. And the first, honestly, years and years, decades ago, before they replenished the beach, it looked like Boneyard Beach. It didn't look anything like it did now. It was full of just some dead Boneyard Beach, kind of like Jekyll Island, that whole area. There was just something about walking that path. You just, you could just feel it. And it's just something that stays with me. I'm very much into connecting kind of the land with like the photography, and not just, just not the birds, but the animals. I think you can't lose sight of it, and especially when you're walking through the, the old plantations, it kind of hits you, so.
For sure. Well, if nobody has any questions, I'm sorry I got choked up when I was introducing her. What happened? But oh wait, we have a question came in. Hold on just a second. Are there Gullah Geechee residents on Hilton Head today?
Oh, yes,
Oh,
yes, yes.
yeah,
They're
I
kind of
wonder if there's any connection, and perhaps, there's the effort down, oh, it's down on the Georgia coast somewhere. There's with the Gullah Geechee trying to pulling a blank on the county, but
yeah, yeah, I know. There's kind of the founding fathers that are here that we all
yeah.
know, and they are all involved in historic Mitchellville.
Yeah, Sapelo is one of the
Capelo,
places
yeah,
where Sapelo Island is where the yeah,
yeah,
and McIntosh County is where
yeah.
was an effort to kind of
Hmm.
take away some of their cultural stuff, and there's a big fight going on
Yeah.
around it. Um, Anything else? Well, this is great. I hope you all get another grant to continue your work. And
Thanks. Yeah, I know I mean, I do it by myself. There's just so much material. I'm just reading a book called Cumbie, and it's actually the story of the Cumbie raid. And if
okay.
you go to the Cumbie unit of the Ace Basin, which is on 17,
Mhm.
that's where all these rice plantations are, and where Harriet Tubman led the raid and brought a whole
Okay.
bunch of freedom seekers back to Hilton Head. So um, really interesting how she talks about just what she encountered in the mud and the alligators and the snakes and the bugs and things there. So, but anyway, thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming, for joining us tonight. Like I said, we Patty gave us permission to record this, so we'll send a private link out to everybody next week to take a look, and feel free to share it with your friends. This was great. I learned something. I'm from Savannah, so this was fascinating for me.
Well, I know you'll be here, but it's so nice to see you again.
Y'all have a good evening, and thank you
Thanks.
so much, Patty.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.